Yeah.
It sounds crazy. We probably don't really look like legitimate scientists.
No, you only lack the proper equipment, like a garbage truck to hang on to the back of.
Before Ghostbusters, fan backlash was a problem. After Ghostbusters, it started looking like promotional strategy. By the time Ghostbusters reached theaters, it had already spent months fighting its audience instead of convincing them to buy a ticket. And that became the real story. Not the ghosts, not the comedy, not the characters, the conflict. Instead of responding to criticism about the trailer, the humor, the reboot premise, or the tone, the conversation changed almost overnight. People stopped asking whether the movie looked funny. They started asking what kind of person would dislike it. Criticism became a character defect. The audience became the problem. And once the audience becomes the problem, the movie no longer has to be. Ghostbusters didn't invent angry fans. It didn't invent internet outrage. Studios had dealt with backlash for decades. What it helped normalize was something far more damaging. A repeatable playbook. Generate controversy, reframe criticism, hijack the conversation, mistake attention for audience goodwill. Today we call it fan bait, and here's the punchline. It has never delivered what Hollywood thought it would. Because attention isn't affection. Attention isn't trust. Attention isn't audience goodwill. These things have to be earned. Yet nearly a decade later, Hollywood is still running the same playbook. Because Ghostbusters didn't simply reboot a beloved franchise, it rebooted blockbuster marketing. And we're still paying for it. The first Ghostbusters trailer landed online with the grace of Melissa McCarthy's fat-ass flat in a parked car. Within days, the backlash exploded. At the time, it became one of the most disliked movie trailers in YouTube history. The complaints weren't complicated. People thought the jokes were weak as hell. The paranormal pixel puppetry looked artificial. The humor felt loud and overproduced. The tone barely resembled the original film. And that tonal shift mattered. The original Ghostbusters understood something timeless. Comedy gets funnier when the characters take the insanity seriously. Bill Murray looked emotionally exhausted half the time. Dan Aykroyd delivered paranormal nonsense with complete sincerity. Harold Ramis treated ghost extermination like a municipal service. And Ernie Hudson? He was us. A regular guy trying to earn a paycheck while the apocalypse unfolded around him. That's where the comedy came from. The world was absurd, the characters weren't. The reboot took the opposite approach. Everything was louder, faster, bigger. Every scene felt like somebody was trying to win an improv contest. The jokes didn't build, they collided. Audiences noticed. And the timing couldn't have been worse. By 2016, reboot fatigue had already set in. Hollywood kept recycling familiar brands because executives trusted existing franchises more than original ideas. People weren't asking for Ghostbusters to be erased. They wanted the story to continue. A legacy sequel. A passing of the torch. An expansion of the world they already loved. Instead, Sony fed the original timeline into a wood chipper and called it a fresh start. Resistance was inevitable. But here's where the story changes. The backlash stopped being about whether the trailer looked good. It became the story itself. Every angry reaction created another headline. Every headline created another argument. Every argument made the movie more visible. Hollywood wasn't watching a trailer fail. It was watching controversy generate attention. And executives learned exactly the wrong lesson. This is where Ghostbusters 2016 stops being a movie controversy and starts becoming something bigger. Because the real shift wasn't that the film got criticized. Movies always get criticized. The film was what that criticism got turned into. Instead of treating audience reaction as feedback, a growing part of entertainment media started reframing it as something else entirely. Not disagreement, not taste, moral failure. The conversation stopped being, does this movie look good? And started becoming, what kind of person dislikes it? That sounds subtle. They're being judged for reacting at all. A joke doesn't land? You hate women. You want a sequel instead of a reboot? Clearly you're the problem. That was the shift. Everything gets filtered through motive instead of taste, and once that happens, the solution becomes obvious. If audiences don't respond to your marketing, you can either improve the film or question the audience. One requires better filmmaking, the other requires a headline. And headlines scale faster, that's the incentive loop. Toxic fandom becomes a label that spreads instantly. Reaction videos multiply. Counter-reaction videos follow. Every argument feeds the next one. Backlash, trolling, criticism. All of it gets flattened into one story, and once that happens, nuance is gone. What's left is a simple narrative that travels easily. A fandom problem, an audience problem, a toxicity problem, and that framing changes everything. Because now the conversation isn't about why the movie isn't landing, it's about what's wrong with the people saying it isn't landing. That's the real shift. Ghostbusters stopped being a comedy trying to win over an audience. It becomes a referendum on whether the audience is allowed to dislike it. And once that happens, the movie is no longer the center of anything. Everything else is.
Stripper pole! We'll take it.
Great. The rent is $21,000 a month.
Fuck you.
This is where Ghostbusters crosses a line. The backlash doesn't stay outside the movie brings it inside. Scenes about internet comments echo real complaints almost word for word. It's one of the strangest things about the entire reboot. Instead of ignoring the criticism, the movie starts answering it. That creates a bizarre viewing experience. Because the film is no longer focused on entertaining you, it's trying to defend itself. The audience became the problem, and the movie treats that problem like it needs an answer. Even the villain feels less like a memorable ghost and more like the physical embodiment of angry people on the internet. Opposition isn't presented as a disagreement over comedy, tone, or the reboot itself. It's framed as bitterness, closed-mindedness, resentment. That's a fundamental shift. The movie stops asking you to enjoy it, it starts asking you to justify why you don't. And that's a terrible trade. Hollywood learned exactly the wrong lesson from all this. Executives saw endless arguments online and mistook them for excitement. They weren't watching audience demand, they were watching conflict. Outrage creates headlines, headlines create clicks, clicks create engagement, and engagement looks impressive on a dashboard. But dashboards don't buy movie tickets, people do. People will spend months arguing about a movie they have absolutely no intention of paying to see. Hollywood confused attention with affection. Ghostbusters 2016 proved those aren't remotely the same thing. And nearly a decade later, studios are still making the same mistake.
The women. How much for the women?
This is where the Hollywood pipeline mutates into a system. Ghostbusters taught Hollywood exactly the wrong lesson. Not that audiences wanted better movies, not that legacy franchises deserve more respect. The lesson was this: controversy creates attention. And attention looks an awful lot like success when you're staring at marketing metrics. The movie dominated headlines for months. Every new argument became another article. Every article became another reaction video. Every reaction spawned 20 more. Everybody was making money, except the studio. That's the part they missed. Hollywood looked at all that noise and mistook it for momentum. It wasn't momentum, it was friction. But friction creates visibility. And visibility is easy to measure. Goodwill isn't. So the industry started chasing the metric instead of the audience. The playbook became painfully familiar. Make a controversial creative decision, wait for the backlash, turn the backlash into headlines, turn the headlines into free publicity. Frame the loudest critics as the face of opposition. Repeat. You can see versions of that playbook everywhere afterward. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Captain Marvel, Lord of the Rings: Rings of Power, Acolyte. Whatever the next franchise happens to be. Different movies, same strategy. Eventually audiences caught on. And once people believe they're being manipulated instead of marketed to, something far more valuable disappears. Fucking trust. Marketing stops feeling like an invitation. It starts feeling like bait. That's a dangerous place for any franchise to live, because audiences can forgive a bad movie. They're far less willing to forgive being played.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Here's the biggest misunderstanding surrounding Ghostbusters. The movie didn't fail because backlash existed. Backlash actually kept the reboot culturally visible for months. The real problem was that visibility never converted into genuine audience enthusiasm. Legacy fans felt dismissed instead of welcomed. Casual audiences became exhausted by the non-stop argument, and many viewers simply thought the movie looked mediocre regardless of the bullshit surrounding it. That combination is deadly for blockbuster filmmaking. Then the structural problems inside the movie itself made everything worse. The pacing drags constantly. Scenes overstay their welcome. The improvisational style frequently feels shapeless instead of sharp. The original Ghostbusters felt controlled. The reboot often feels like everyone is waiting for scenes to accidentally become funny through raw volume and improvisation. Then international problems hit. China blocked the film because of restrictions involving supernatural content, removing a massive overseas revenue source modern blockbusters increasingly depended on. Suddenly the movie needed overwhelming domestic momentum. It never got it. And once audiences stopped viewing Ghostbusters as entertainment and started viewing it as internet content, the commercial momentum collapsed rapidly. Ghostbusters 2016 didn't invent angry fans. It didn't invent internet outrage. What it helped normalize was something far more damaging. A marketing strategy built around conflict. Instead of winning audiences over, studios learned they could fight with them. The audience became the problem, and once the audience becomes the problem, the movie no longer has to earn their trust. It only has to keep the argument alive. That became Ghostbusters' real legacy. Hollywood looked at months of headlines, arguments, reaction videos, and endless online attention, and completely misread what it was seeing. It saw visibility. It assumed support. Those aren't the same thing. Because attention isn't trust. Attention isn't goodwill. Attention isn't affection. Those things have to be earned. Instead of asking why audiences weren't connecting with the film, Hollywood spent the next decade trying to manage the audience instead. Criticism was anticipated before release. Marketing campaigns became increasingly confrontational. The argument often arrived before the trailer, and eventually audiences caught on. That's why so many later franchise course corrections lean so heavily into sincerity, nostalgia, and legacy continuity. Ghostbusters Afterlife practically plays like an apology letter covered in ectoplasm. Hollywood finally remembered something it should have known all along. You can't shame people into loving your movie. You can't guilt them into buying a ticket. And you can't build a lasting franchise by treating your biggest fans like the opposition. Ghostbusters turned criticism into the enemy. Hollywood turned that mistake into a business model. And nearly a decade later, is still paying the price.
Hey man, if you down, like and subscribe. Catch you on the flip side, flapjacks.